Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact Video Series. My name is Ryan Duffy and I'm the director of the museum. And this week we're going to talk about one of the Ellicott brothers, though not the one that you might think of initially. No, not Joseph Ellicott, but we're going to talk about his older brother, Andrew Ellicott, who was probably the most famous surveyor in the very early part of the United States and was actually the one who sort of taught Joseph Ellicott what he knew about surveying and actually worked with him on several projects. Andrew Ellicott was actually the oldest of the 9 Ellicott children and was born in 1754 in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, but moved with the family into Maryland when his father moved to Ellicott Mills, Maryland. Andrew Ellicott's childhood foreshadowed the success he would have in his field of surveying, as he was a gifted mechanic and mathematician, which would do him very well in his desired field. Andrew would marry his wife Sarah Brown in 1775, and they would actually have 10 children together. Soon after they were married, the Revolutionary War breaks out, and Andrew was commissioned as an officer in the Elks Ridge Battalion of the Maryland State Militia. And throughout the war, he would serve and would actually reach the rank of major, which he would be called by for the rest of his life. Now, following the end of the Revolutionary War and the beginning of the United States, this is when Ellicott would take off in his surveying career. In 1784, he was chosen to join a group that would extend the Mason-Dixon line between Maryland and Pennsylvania and bring it farther west. 2 years later, in 1786, he was commissioned again to survey the western boundary of Pennsylvania between Pennsylvania and Ohio. This would become known as the Ellicott Line, which would basically delineate the original 13 colonies from the Northwest Territory. He was then tasked by President George Washington, at the recommendation of Benjamin Franklin, to survey the western boundary between Pennsylvania and New York State, and this is what gives us the Erie Triangle, near where Erie, Pennsylvania is today. And while on this trip, he also surveyed the Niagara River and Niagara Falls. Now, in 1794, he was sent back to the Erie Triangle, where he actually laid out and planned what became known as the city of Erie, Pennsylvania. It was in 1792, though, that Andrew was called upon to take on the biggest task of his career, and this was to assist in the surveying and planning of what was going to be the capital of the United States, the District of Columbia. Now, in the initial phases of this project, he was tasked with surveying the boundaries of the district. It was at this time that he worked with the famed African-American astronomer and surveyor Benjamin Banneker. And it was also at this time that he got to work with his 2 younger brothers, Joseph and Benjamin, as they assisted in the laying out of the boundary of the district. And at this time, when they were laying out the boundary, they would actually make boundary posts, very similar to what you might see in Western New York during the Holland Land Survey, but at this point it was to outline the District of Columbia. A lot of those stones are still visible today, and you can still make out some of the markings going all the way back to Andrew and Joseph and Benjamin Ellicott. The difficulty would be stepped up one more notch as the next phase of the project went into effect, as leadership of the project had a major shakeup, as the head planner, Pierre Charles L'Enfant, stepped down and departed the project completely, leaving it in total disarray. It was then up to Andrew Ellicott to step in and finish his plans for laying out the city, and it's actually Andrew Ellicott's plans that are used as the basis for what we know today as Washington, D.C. And if you refer back to a lot of the very earliest maps of Washington, D.C., they'll actually have Andrew Ellicott's name on them as given credit for what the city came to look like. Now, in 1796, Ellicott was called upon again by George Washington to lay out essentially what was the southern boundary of the United States, and this was particularly to lay out the boundary between Spanish Florida and what we would know as Georgia and Alabama today. This actually became known as another Ellicott's Line, as it followed perfectly the 31st parallel. Now that we move into the 19th century, Ellicott's prominence in the surveying field only grows. He is called upon to be the Surveyor General of the Northwest Territories by President Thomas Jefferson, However, due to his disillusion with previous administrations and all the politics revolving around it, and his want to stick closer to home in Pennsylvania, he turns down the offer. Instead, he becomes the secretary of the Pennsylvania Land Office. In 1803, he's called upon by Jefferson again, but this job is slightly different, as he's asked to mentor the explorer Meriwether Lewis before he goes out on his major expedition with his compatriot Clark, and to explore the newly acquired Louisiana Purchase. 10 years later, in 1813, he actually takes a position as a professor of mathematics at West Point, at the military academy there, and this is actually where he would pass away in 1820 from a stroke, and it's where he is buried today, so he's actually buried at West Point. However, he would have one more major surveying task to undertake before the end of his life, and this would occur in 1817, as he was asked to resurvey the Collins-Valentine line, which was part of the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812, and this line separated the Canadian province of Quebec from New York and what would become Vermont, as there had become a dispute over the line, so Andrew Ellicott was tasked with resurveying that line to settle that boundary once and for all. So Andrew Ellicott in this area might not be as well known as his younger brother Joseph, but if you look at the early history of the United States, his fingerprints are all over it. He was responsible for the southern boundary of the United States at the time, one of the northern boundaries at the time, and essentially all the boundaries of Pennsylvania, parts of New York, Ohio, Maryland. So you could almost say that Andrew Ellicott helped draw the map of the United States. And maybe without him, his younger brother Joseph doesn't become another great surveyor and isn't hired by the Holland Land Company, and history may be changed forever. So even though Andrew Ellicott didn't settle in Western New York and never actually stepped foot, his impact can still be felt through his family going down the line. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of our Artifact video series. There are plenty more that have been done already, so please go back and check those out on our YouTube channel, Holland Land Office Museum. And we're going to keep doing these going forward, so I hope you join us in the future.